Good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's Washington Institute Virtual Policy Forum, the latest in our counterterrorism lecture series, with French counterterrorism coordinator and intelligence coordinator, Laurent Nuñez. It's a pleasure to have you here. Today we'll be discussing contending with new and old threats, a French perspective on counterterrorism. The United States and France are long-standing partners in the field of counterterrorism. Both played prominent roles in the territorial defeat of the Islamic State in Iraq and in Syria, and they also cooperate closely in the Sahel. In the context of today's evolving domestic and international terrorism threats, the Washington Institute is very pleased to announce today's event with Laurent Nuñez, one of France's most senior and experienced security officials, to discuss his country's counterterrorism priorities and prospects for transatlantic cooperation. Mr. Nuñez has served as France's National Coordinator for Intelligence and Counter-Terrorism since 2020. His office is part of the French presidential administration and coordinates the French intelligence community, police, and judicial services involved in counterterrorism matters. Previously, he served in a wide array of government positions, including junior minister and head of the DGSI, the agency in charge of domestic security and intelligence issues. Mr. Nuñez, thank you so much for taking the time during your visit to Washington to have this event with us. And I turn the floor over to you for your opening remarks. For our viewers, if you scroll to the right bottom of your screen, you will have the option of hearing today's event either in English or in French, and you will have the ability to send in questions via the Q&A function. Mr. Nuñez, the floor is yours. Thank you in advance.
Merci beaucoup. Bonsoir.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Good evening, all. Thank you for welcoming me at the Washington Institute. I am very happy to be able to take advantage of my visit to the American capital to exchange with the expert community that you represent. Washington is known for the richness of its foreign policy debate, and I knew our debate will be most interesting tonight. As you said, the partnership between France and the United States in the counter-terrorism fight is a historic partnership. We may have had differences of opinion, especially during the war in Iraq in 2003. But when it's time to be solidarity, to work together for the protection of our citizens, we've always stood together, whereas we're in the French reaction after 9/11 or the American reaction after the 2015 attacks in France. So, as you know, this is a particular context for this visit. The announcement of the AUKUS alliance September 15th opened a very serious crisis between our two countries, and it's important that bilateral conversations take place to resolve this crisis. This is why I'm here in Washington right now. And so, to answer your question, I thought it was important to center my talk on 4 points. First, what is the terrorist threat right now in France, especially for all of those who are listening and seeing us, that the situation of the terrorist threat in France is not that different from that in the rest of the other European countries. I'll talk some more about that. Secondly, I would like to present the reaction of the authorities to the threat, in the face of this terrorist threat, and then I would like to talk about the resilience of French society in the face of terrorism. And finally, I would like to talk about the transatlantic cooperation between France and the United States in the fight against terrorism. First of all, on what we call on the terrorist threat in the French territory. That threat, as you know, is still very high. It's still very high. We were in 2015, we suffered in France, 2016 in Belgium, of attacks that were projected attacks from jihadist individuals from Syria, Iraq, in 2015, 2016. So quickly, we've got prepared to stop this type of attacks. I'll talk about these measures later. And today, what we have to face is a threat that is carried by individuals that are kind of isolated, that are present on the French territory, and who act based on the propaganda of the Islamic State or Al-Qaeda, who encourage them to act on their national territory. And so today, most of the attacks that we've had, that we suffered in France, have to do with this category. In 2017, we talked about inspired threats, so people who would act on the national territory, but were like remotely controlled by the Islamic State. Today, those individuals can act in a totally autonomous manner without contact with people in Syria or in Iraq. Of course, for the intelligence services, detecting these individuals is harder, because these people are not directly related to the Islamic State, so they're not known from the intelligence services, and so they're not being specifically followed by the intelligence services. So this is the challenge that our services are facing. That's what they have to face. What I was saying is that the threat is identical in other European countries. Other European countries experience that same threat, what we call endogenous threat on the territory. But the exogenous threat, the projected threat, is less probable, but we still consider that we have to give a lot of attention to it. Why? For several reasons, and this is why cooperation between the intelligence services between all the countries is so important, especially between France and the United States, because the projected threat, it always has to be taken into account, because as we know, in Syria, in Iraq, the Islamic State continues to survive, of course, in clandestinity, but it's still acting, still committing attacks, and to have probably intentions to project terrorist acts in Europe and on the Western world. Concerns notably certain fighters in Syria, in Iraq, who were able to go back to their country of origin in places where there haven't necessarily been stopped or brought to justice. And so this is why we have to be extremely vigilant. We think especially in the region of the Balkans and the Maghreb, which is still attracting all our attention, because many individuals could have come back from Syria and Iraq and are staying in these territories of the Balkans and Maghreb. And several, we have to be very careful of any potential hotbed of jihadist hotbeds where Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State, of course, are suffering the action of the French and local forces, but are still existing on those territories. And there are other hotbeds in Afghanistan and Mozambique. So we have to pay attention to all these different jihadist hotbeds which exist all over the world, and can constitute, of course, basis of projection of attacks towards France, Europe. And so this is why we have to be extremely vigilant on following up and following the development of these different hotbeds. We talk a lot about Sunnite terrorist threat, endogenous, exogenous, but we also pay attention to other types of terrorist threats. Many are very well known here in the United States, but we are only seeing them develop in the in European democracies, which is terrorism coming from the ultra right and the ultra left. And in the last few years, 6 ultra-right hotbeds were dismantled by the intelligence services that had intentions of acting on the territory, as in and their projects was to attack the democratic institutions, to topple the power for various reasons. For certain groups, it's to ensure that to substitute the states, which they find defeating, or to attack a state which they feel is acting against its own population. So we see these types of small groups taking a lot of power in the same way it is happening in the United States. These small groups are gaining power. So we have dismantled 6 groups, 6 ultra-right groups in France. It's a minority of people, but still. And the characteristics of these groups are very similar to those seen in the United States. They start in the clandestinity and have intention to go on to violent actions, terrorist actions. And for the 6 groups that we apprehended in France, it was same thing for the ultra left. At the end of 2020, we were able to dismantle the group, which intended to pursue a violent terrorist action. So we are paying attention to all these different threats, which is why we need to be in partnership with the intelligence services of other countries. The second point of my talk, I'll try to go fast so we have time for questions, but my second point is the system that we put in place in France to respond to the terrorist threat. This service was to reinforce the intelligence services in France, which saw their resources, their human, technical, and budgetary resources increase. As far as human resources, since the election of President Macron in 2017, for the 5 years, it's about 2,000 people will have been recruited for the domestic services alone, totally for this over the 5 years. Since 2018, we have 20% more people have been hired. We've also had an increase of our budgetary and technical resources to give us, which makes us much more able to gain more information. So this effort covered all intelligence services, internal, domestic, but also international. In particular, the DGSI, which is under the Department of the Army, and also legislative measures have been taken in place with a better follow-up of the people who have radicalized, who risk to go to resort to terrorism. We adopted a law in October 2017, which helped us to get out of the state of emergency. And I could maybe say more about it in the questions later, but which enables us to go to people's home, to people's domicile, which are when authorized by judicially, and plus other measures of administrative policing of individuals who are suspected of intending to act violently. So laws, some measures of coordination, strengthen coordination between the different services, which is my job to take care of a cooperation measure. So we ask intelligence services to help the information flow better. Also, international coordination. So since 2001, since September 11, the exchange of information between the exchanges of information between different states have increased a lot. And then since 2015, these exchanges have been multiplied against. And today, the international cooperation in counterterrorism is at a very high level. The exchange of information is a lot more fluid. And as far as France is concerned, we are participating in that exchange of information. And to the reinforcement of the counterterrorism action is also seen at the European Union level. Of course, the European Union doesn't have is not competent judicially in counterterrorism, but it is competent to furnish its member state some legal tools. And so several regulations have been adopted in several European countries as to weapons, and also as far as the traveling of people in the Schengen agreement, which enables us to follow the travels of people who are being suspected and identified as suspects. So many measures that are so important. All of the measures that have been set up since 2017 have helped us dismantle 6 groups from the ultra-right and 1 from the ultra-left. So we have to stay extremely vigilant, and this is how we achieved the results I just was telling you about. So this is something we've tried to reinforce since 2017. This the increase of the legal competence has respected always the state of law. So the intelligence services need to undergo controls, which by the Senate and the National Assembly, and the intelligence services, when they set up new measures, are controlled by another administration, which controls very thoroughly the new measures that are set in place. So there is a proportionality that is brought in the action that is set up. So democracies don't fall in the trap set by the jihadists, which is to become totalitarian. On the contrary, all the measures are set up within a legal framework. And so the control powers of the parliamentary delegation and of the intelligence services have been increased. So this is what I wanted to say about on these first 2 points, the state of the threat and our reaction to it in our society. The challenge in front of us, as far as preventing the terrorist threat, we have the legal system, international cooperation, and domestic, that we have to be vigilant about projected attacks, but they're less probable. Our challenge today for intelligence services, and I think it's also the case here in the United States, with what you call the domestic threat, with individuals who can act without having been previously identified by the intelligence services. The challenge for our services is to be able to identify those people who are not known from the services and who are going to act very fast. We are with great determination. And so this is the challenge that we are facing right now. It is something that's very important, that our services think together about this question, how to deal with these unknown individuals who leave trace only on the internet. And so that brings questions, and for us, that questions that we need to talk about algorithms, and also about the contributions that the platforms can have to help detect those people. This is why the partnership between SAPE is so very important. I know that several of the authors of the attack in the United States in the ultra-right movement here were not necessarily known from the intelligence services. So this is the challenge that we are facing right now. My third point, quickly, is the resilience of our French society, of our societies, of our Western democracies, European, American, and the reality that we are seeing after each attack, the mobilization of the population that we have seen in our countries after each attack is something that has to be underlined and highlighted. As you know, after the attack, right now in France, the trial of the terrorists of November 13, 2015 is underway. The attack that took place in the Bataclan, which is a show place in France, which is near one of the we've had one at the football stadium in Saint-Denis, and this day, the victims of these attacks are coming to witness, and we share their humanity, their strength, and their resilience in their testimony. And so, in a few days, we'll commemorate the death of Samuel Paty, who was a history teacher who was murdered exactly 1 year ago. And this was a terrorist attack, which was very traumatic to the country. And the French population stood together and showed its unanimous support for the school institution. So our resilience, I think that's extremely powerful in front of the terrorist threat, to never let it take us where they want to take us, which is hatred and division. And our democracies go over these obstacles, and we owe the victims of terrorism to keep that determination. And right now, as all of us, I want to think about all the victims of terrorism for the French national territory, especially with the trial that is ongoing right now, and also as we're getting ready to commemorate the death of Samuel Paty, the history teacher. And since we are talking about this attack, which aimed at the history teacher Samuel Paty, I would like to have a brief aside and talk about a policy that we have in France. And we think sometimes that it raises a lot of incomprehension, especially in English-speaking countries and in Muslim countries, which is the policy of of fighting against the Islamist separatism. So I want to talk about this because it's really important in the action that's being led in France. Until 2017, 2018, all the measures that we had in place were aimed especially to the violent radicalization. So we were looking, and we're still doing that, as I was saying, but we were trying to identify the people, individuals who were likely to act violently as terrorists. But these measures aimed at detecting and stopping, after evaluating them, those individuals. And what we wished to do with the President of the Republic at the end of 2017, beginning of 2018, to start a policy that, in order to identify all the forms of radicalization, not just those that were directly expressed through a violent translation, but to consider that religious law could be higher than the republic, than the laws of the republic, with some consequences, of course, and among which the fact of not respecting the equality of women, the fact of noticing on some territories to take children out of school and put them, some children, and to put them in religious school, and completely and with a program that's completely different from the national education program, opposing public services to the benefit of religious laws, with the time of with inequality between women and men, for instance, that could be infringing on the freedom of expression, which is really basic in our democracies, which can be all the way to blasphemy, and the fact of to attack the freedom of expression. So part of the policy that was led in France, which is still being led in France, is aims at each time that we see this separatist action where the religious law takes over the republic, the laws of the republic, and has some consequences that can be reprehensible by law, to act upon it. And we do that in great part in response
grande majorité des musulmans qui demandent évidemment cette clarification.
in response to what the Muslims are asking for, and we're also doing that also because this form of separatism, of radicalization, can sometimes go to violent action. So that's why I wanted to open this digression while I was talking about the murder of Samuel Paty, the terrorist murder. I was wanting to digress here because in this particular attack, what we saw is this terrorist attack touched a teacher who was within a conflict started by religious extremists about and this is how we saw that religious extremism could focus and lead to the murder of an individual. So it's not necessarily in terrorist actions, but there exists in the action that we have that we are leading in France also this dimension that will work for all religions, of course. When I talk about religious law, and I will say that most of the Muslims in France are completely aligned with this policy, which is a Republican policy aiming at guaranteeing the freedom of expression, freedom of conscience, and individual freedom, which is protected by the French Republic, a space of living together where religion can invite themselves and impose their law. And this is what we try to, what we want to express to all our country and population, that all our the principles of our republic are the strongest
Je voulais prendre le temps
in
d'expliquer.
the last summer.
C'est un pays de liberté, comme les États-Unis d'Amérique. Chacun, finalement, veut garantir cette liberté avec son cadre particulier de préservation et avec ses traditions nationales qui peuvent être évidemment...
You need to understand that, of course, we respect the national traditions that each country has in Europe. And we just wanted to show you that we do work together in with America, with the United Kingdom. We want to work not only military, but we want to remind you that when the United States started going into in Africa, in the Sahel, or in Afghanistan, the French always sustained the American forces, and were very engaged in this. On top of this, of course, we exchange a lot of intelligence. We cooperate at a high level. It's true with other countries, of course, but it's very important between our two countries. We do not think that this cooperation should change so much with what's happening in America, where we keep thinking that the jihadism is the biggest terrorism when we have so much local terrorism, acts of terrorism, like the white supremacy, etc. The fact that we have to look inward into our own terrorist or your own doesn't mean that we cannot work together internationally to actually cooperate together, because even if these groups that act in Europe or those that act in the North America, they may not work together, but they do have the motivations that they have are similar. So we still need to cooperate. They are exactly the same. And the supremacy, the ultra-right racist approach to things really need to be explored and then exploited to help these intelligence services prepare together. Of course, we can talk a little bit more about this during the question period, but I wanted to insist about the partnership that we need to keep going, even if the acts of terrorism change. We have to protect our citizens.
Merci beaucoup, Laurent. Thank you very much. I want to remind everybody that you can ask your questions through the Q&A function. And if there's anybody who joined us late, on the bottom right-hand corner, you can click on whether you'd like to hear this event translated into French or translated into English. Laurent, I'd like to take the opportunity to ask you a few short questions, and then we'll open it up to the questions. Several have come in already. I'd like to first address the elephant in the room. Is U.S.-French counterterrorism security cooperation at risk of being impacted by the fallout of the AUKUS agreement and the submarine technology deal?
On a, après l'annonce de l'accord AUKUS,
il y a eu une crise de confiance entre les deux pays. Between the two countries, there's obviously been an issue. In France, it was not appreciated. It wasn't just a matter of commercial issues. It was really a matter of trust and confidence into the work we've been doing together. We are trying now to work again, step by step, with everything. And that's one of the reasons why I am here in Washington, is that we're trying to be transparent and to be honest in in our report.
So the United States and France see the terrorist threats facing each country slightly differently. In the United States, we're paying a lot more attention to white supremacist and other domestic violent extremist threats. And as you noted, in France, the most pressing threats come from radical jihadist milieu, even as there are also far right and far left threats. But I wonder if coming off the Trump administration, which wasn't so supportive of multilateral agreements, and now more recently following the Biden administration's mishandling of the Afghanistan withdrawal, if there is a bigger background and foundation for French concern about the US commitment to the transatlantic counterterrorism cooperation to which we've become accustomed over the years.
Je pense que la menace d'ultra-droite...
La menace de la droite en France n'a jamais été... The French right-wing terrorists have never been disengaged in France. There wasn't just a priority with the jihadists in France, yes. So they are prioritary because this is where the biggest problem we have are coming from jihadists. It is important for us to stay on top of it. Nevertheless, as we saw in America, the right-wing groups have more money, have exactly the same purpose, the same goals as the ones that the American right-wings have. They do not appreciate institutions. They do not appreciate our government. They do not believe that the government is there for them. And very quickly, they turn into clandestinity, which up to 2-3 years ago did not happen in France, did not exist in France. So we are now having to face the phenomenon that's similar to America. And this is very important. We cannot neglect. And I can assure you that more countries in Europe have these kind of problems. In France, it's been 6 different groups that we were able to stop right before they did it. But in Germany, for example, we had a prefect that was killed and things like this. And à Reykjavik, en Iceland, we really had to face the problem of these right-wing groups throughout Europe, so we have to cooperate within the EU as well.
I'd like to follow up on your comments about what some still refer to as the anti-separatism law. The bill's gone through multiple name changes, of course, reflecting its sensitivity. It started off as anti-separatism, ended up as a law to reinforce Republican principles. What I'd like to ask you is, what is the French government doing to make Muslim French citizens feel that this law is not targeting them, but is rather reinforcing Republican principles?
The French government does a lot. They work with representatives of these communities and of these religious clerics. We do not want the separatism that Islamic jihadists are trying to create. And it happens to be fairly much understood by the French population, including the Muslims in France, that agree and do not want to be submitted to the rules of this extremist religious point of view. We have to be firm. There is a minority that, of course, feels attacked, But our president did say in October of 2020, when he came and explained, he very clearly that one part of the group that became radicalized were doing it because sometimes the French Republic wasn't present in terms of education, of work, of insertion, community insertion. And as this was announced, we did a lot of work with the community, and we received a lot of positive comment and support from these communities at these times. So our approach has to be equal in the way we approach, because we do not want to push people to become radicalized, but even worse, violently radicalized. Of course, we have to explain these laws. It's complicated, it's difficult, but every time that we can take an opportunity to explain it, like I'm doing today, everywhere in the world, we have to take this time to explain it.
Thank you. One of the most significant areas of disagreement between the United States and its European partners on counterterrorism relates to how to address extremist material on social media. It has to do with European ways of addressing privacy and America's way of addressing First Amendment rights related to freedom of speech. When you sit down with your American counterparts, what's your message to them on what you would like to see America do related to the social media giants?
Il y a plusieurs aspects dans.
There are multiple aspects in this question about the networking that we have. We cannot be naive. Part of the radicalization, in particular the violent one, goes through the social medias. So we have to have a reaction that is clear, depending on the topic. So thinking about terrorism and the content of terrorism action, there is actually a work that we've been working on that the France has pushed a lot, is the fact that if it's blocked in one European country, the content should be blocked in all of Europe. So sometimes there's also content that is not purely terrorist, but talk about hate, separatism, manipulation of information, which is kind of important. And this is where we absolutely need these social media to work with us, be it by self-regulating, so they can detect these kind of messages, they can moderate these messages, or suppress these messages. So there's been a law adopted this summer. The French government had created new obligations to these social media forms to moderate the content. And now it's discussed through Europe to have exactly the same effect. It's extremely important that social media is responsible and is able to remove these kind of documents and contents from the platforms. But later, from an investigative point of view, we also need access to all this data as fast as possible. And it's essential for the American groups and the intelligence, the CIA and FBI, etc., to help us, in particular from a jurisdictional point of view, so they can share information and contact.
So we have a lot of questions coming in, and a bunch of them relate to Syria. So I'm going to try and organize them together. Shortly after the revolution began, I was in Paris and I spoke to one of your counterparts, who told me about young French Muslim teenagers who were telling their parents they were going to the south of France for spring vacation, but were in fact going to Syria for a week or two. I think many people forget that there were foreign fighters flocking to Syria long before there was ISIS or Jabhat al-Nusra. Are you at all concerned about the normalization of the Assad regime in terms of potential security threats to France?
Yeah. Alors, ce à quoi vous faites allusion, c'est...
So you are talking about young teenagers that it's true around 2012 and 2013, 2014, up to 2015, went in Iraq and in Syria, some supposedly for humanitarian reasons, to go and help the rebellious group in Syria fighting. And then we realized later on that they went to actually fight. So they became members of a terrorist organization. Right now, we do not have any more departures towards this area. So there might be some exceptions, but most young people cannot go anymore in Syria or Iraq. So it's not a problem actually currently. France was really concerned about this issue. We had 1,400 young people that left France, that were French, that are French, to went there, and that was also a big number from other countries from Europe, but it's no more an issue.
One of our participants asks a bit of a historical question. At the height of the point of ISIS in Syria, from 2014, say, to 2016, what do you think was the relationship between ISIS and the Assad regime? I think what he's asking is, was the Assad regime in any way helping ISIS, doing business with them, releasing people from prisoners, etc.?
Alors, moi, je ne répondrai pas à cette question qui dépasse le champ.
I cannot answer this question because I wasn't in that position in 2014. Mais je sais, but I know that during 2014 to 2016, the Assad regime, we knew that they were not fighting ISIS or blocking them in any way. There was no ambiguity in the fact that we believe that Syria was helping them, but I cannot get into details because I don't know as much about the Assad regime at the time.
From Afghanistan, can you assess the external terrorism threat that you see emerging from Afghanistan following the Taliban takeover? In your view, is it likely that we will see the emergence of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan with an intent to carry out attacks against the West?
Le problème que pose la victoire.
The problem that the Taliban in Afghanistan creates for intelligence services all over the world and their fight against terrorism are four different problems that I believe we all are asking each other. And this is the reason why we absolutely need a strong partnership with America and everybody else in the Western politics. So the first problem that we have to pay attention to is, will the fact that the Taliban is now in charge of Afghanistan, will it invite people coming from Iraq, from Pakistan, from other countries to go there and train to become jihadists? From France, we don't believe that it's going to be a major issue for us because we do not have anymore this link and this ease of access. But we have to remember that between 1996 to 2001, there was about 100 different French young men that went to actually fight with Al-Qaeda. This was the first time it happened. The second problem we have to figure out if the people that are coming because they served for our countries, many of them are now arriving in our countries. How do we verify that we can screen them and make sure that the people that are actually coming, be it in America or in France or with external partnership, to verify that these people really were helpful and not groups coming in. The third point is that there are actual parts of Taliban that won't be able to stop some members of Al-Qaeda to come and install themselves in some remote areas. And can they prosper? Can they be better or not? And we do not know if the Taliban can stop these kind of groups to come and reset in this country. As you know now, there's already various violent attacks in Afghanistan, and we don't know yet how the state, the new Taliban state can help them. So the risk becomes higher and higher if they cannot resolve this issue. And the fourth point, of course, is the fact that, oh my gosh, they now finally created a state. Is it possible to inspire young people from various Arabic countries, Sunni countries, etc., to go there because they can see the fact that we left Afghanistan as a win for their cause and a reason for them to get more involved? So these are the 4 points that we have to deal with once the United States and Europe left Afghanistan. These are not minor problems. So our intelligence service for the French, be it external or internal, are paying attention to this, and we work very closely with all our partners.
When the Biden administration explained the decision to withdraw from Afghanistan, one point it made was that there are more pressing venues where terrorism is happening today, pointing in particular to Africa. France, of course, has been very active in counterterrorism in Africa. So I'd first like to ask you how you perceive the nature of the terrorist threats from Africa to French interests in Africa, or to France itself back home?
La France est intervenue en 2013.
France went in 2013 in Mali to avoid the fact that the state could just be lost to jihadist terrorists. And we stayed in the Sahel area with what we call the Barkhane group. And France, of course, stayed present in this area because you are correct, Al-Qaeda still exists there. There's multiple groups that all feel like they could actually gain more space and create caliphate. But with local allies, as well as with European allies, we are trying to eradicate this terrorism. But it doesn't only happen with military action. In these areas, we work a lot with the local states in helping them to establish jurisdiction, to establish the rule of law, and to help them with social political approach to help the tribes and their own citizens in the various territories that are touched by this growth of Al-Qaeda. So it is true. We have a lot of success there, and we have to be thankful and recognize them. In particular, we killed some of the leaders of the Al-Qaeda in there, and we need to be clear about the fact that we are working very hard to attack these particular groups there.
In your remarks, you spoke about a range of different types of terrorist threats, not just Sunni extremism, but also far right and far left. I'd like to ask you about Shia extremist groups as well. To start, can you speak about how you see the threat of Iranian state terrorism in Europe and in France in particular, especially coming off the plot targeting the Mujahideen Khalq MEK conference in Paris?
Là-dessus, évidemment, ce sont des choses qui sont beaucoup plus confidentielles, hein, sur lesquelles...
This is very confidential, so there's some things that I cannot talk and express right now. I cannot add any comments about this, but we are vigilant, we are paying attention to it. In particular, it's a problem that was in Belgium. In Villepin, there had been an attack in 2018, in June 2018, and now we have to actually pay attention to this, but right now we actually are dealing with these people. We were able to stop this attack in June 2018 in Villepin, and we actually, that issue was addressed in Belgium, in the court there.
So talking in details about Iran is a little too sensitive. Let's talk for a second about Lebanese Hezbollah, which it appears is still active not only in Europe, but in France. Of course, France participated in a very significant way in Operation Cedar, leading to the conviction of a Hezbollah operative in French court. In 2010, a Lebanese French professor in Lyon was used to rent a safe house in Cyprus where Hezbollah was storing ammonium nitrate. And we heard from the previous administration here that Hezbollah was moving ammonium nitrate through Europe, including through France. What is your sense of the threat from Hezbollah in France?
C'est vrai que la France et les États-Unis.
It's true that the France and the United States have sometimes had a different position, especially as to the different qualifying the different branches of Hezbollah. I know you're a specialist on the subject, on the matter, on the topic. What I will answer, I won't answer your question not so directly because of confidentiality, but French services are interested in all forms of terrorism, and we take all information seriously. You talked about two facts, especially. So no information is left aside as in terms of terrorism, whichever the authors. The French service are always very motivated and focused on these questions. There are some things I cannot say and I cannot talk about, but you can know and be assured that we are very focused. And as you've seen in June 18th, as we talked earlier.
It is a sign of a successful event and of tremendous interest in the speaker that we have far more questions than we will be able to answer this evening. But it is really wonderful that you are here for consultations, especially at a time of some tension between the US and France, to make sure that on the issue of counterterrorism in particular, the US-French historic, exceptionally close cooperation continues. I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to spend this hour with us here at the Washington Institute. I want to thank your colleagues who've made this possible and my colleagues at the Washington Institute who made this possible. and wish you continued success in your visit here. I thank you all who've joined us in this webinar and look forward to being able to put the video and the text up on our website in due course. Have a good evening, everybody. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Merci à vous.